In this video, we will be filling out the form N-400, the application for naturalization together. The expiration date for this current form is February 28th, 2027, and the edition date, which you can find at the bottom of each page, is April 1st, 2024. If you're filling this out by yourself, obviously you can skip this whole top part, and now all you have to do is start at part 1. Right off the bat, you are being asked to enter your A number. So we'll enter our A number here. And usually the A number has 9 numbers. If your A number doesn't have 9 numbers, but let's say for example it has 7 numbers, in that case, you need to begin filling out your A number with zeros for the missing remaining numbers. And then you can go ahead and fill in the rest of your A number just like this. Next, you are being specifically asked on what basis are you applying for naturalization. And you definitely want to review the form instructions for this form just so that you're not confused. The form instructions for this particular form I found very useful. On page 6 of the form instructions, they will tell you what to select for part 1 of this form. You can only select one of these boxes. Most applicants will select either 1A or 1B. And so the general provision box refers to people who are applying for naturalization based on a 5-year rule. If you look at the instructions, it is for those who are applying for naturalization if they have been a permanent resident for at least 5 years. If you are applying on the basis of a 3-year rule, being married to a U.S. citizen, then in that case, you will select box 1B. And this is what we're going to select for the purposes of this form. If you selected to be a spouse of a U.S. citizen or under general provision, you may be eligible to apply for naturalization 90 days early. The rest of the eligibilities review in the form instructions. Moving forward, provide your personal information, starting with your current legal name as it appears on your birth certificate, your marriage certificate if you changed your name after marriage, your foreign passport, for example. Also, you do not have to fill out the form in all capital letters, but that's just personally what I prefer. In addition, if some parts of the form do not apply to you, you may write not applicable N/A or leave it completely blank. Both are acceptable. So once you fill out your current legal name, they also ask you to provide other names you have used since birth. Page 6 of the form instructions will tell you what kinds of other names you must provide in this form. Aliases, your maiden name, family name at birth if it has changed, assumed names and nicknames, and even alternate spellings or variations of your name. This also includes any names that you have ever indicated in previous immigration applications or petitions, and including the name you have written on your green card, social security card, driver's license, etc. And if you do fill out this part of the application, you will need to provide copies of documents that prove your name change. Moving forward, here you're being asked if you would like to change your name free of charge, aside from, of course, paying for the naturalization fee. But if you choose to change your name during this entire process, you wouldn't have to fill out any additional paperwork or pay any additional fees. So if you would like to legally change your name, you would select yes, and now provide what you want your new name to be. One note about name change, which you should also read about in the form instructions on page 7, you will not be able to naturalize in a USCIS field office location. Your naturalization ceremony will occur in a court in front of a judge who will then approve your name change as well as your citizenship. And that is where you will take Pledge of Allegiance. When you do choose to change your name, there may be additional background checks that they might have to do on the new name, and your entire naturalization process may take a few months longer. Moving forward, provide your USCIS online account number. Next, select your gender, provide your date of birth, and if you have ever indicated other dates of birth, then you would also have to indicate them in the additional information page. Moving on, provide the date you became a lawful permanent resident, which you can find on your green card. And let's say in our case, Jane is applying based on the 3-year rule, marriage to a US citizen. She's eligible to apply for naturalization about 90 days before her 3rd green card anniversary date. Next, provide country of birth and country of citizenship or nationality. And if you are a citizen or national of more than one country, here you would write the country, the passport of which you used to enter the United States on whatever visa you entered on before, and all additional citizenship or nationalities on the last page of this form. Moving on to question 10, this one asks you if at least one of your parents was a US citizen before you were 18 years old. So you're likely to answer no to this question, but if you answer yes, there may be a chance that you are a US citizen. In that case, you would not be eligible to fill out the form N-400. Moving on. This question asks you if you have a physical or developmental disability or a mental impairment that might prevent you from doing the English language test or a civics test during your naturalization interview. You should review the form instructions on pages 8 and 9, which talk a little bit more in detail who can be exempt from doing a civics test or an English language test and what will qualify you to do that, and when you would be eligible to fill out the form N-648. The next part of the application asks you if you would like to request a Social Security card update, whether you would like to receive a replacement Social Security card which doesn't have the statement that authorizes you to work with Department of Homeland Security permission, or if you would also like to update the name on your Social Security card. If you would like a replacement card, which you should probably get, you should answer yes to this question and provide your Social Security number here. And if you agree that the Social Security Administration updates your card, updates the name on your card, then you have to click yes that you authorize these two agencies to communicate with each other. Moving on, now you are being asked to fill out your biographic information, your ethnicity, and your race. You can select as many boxes as necessary. And if you are unsure what your ethnicity or race is, you can also review that in the form instructions. So on page 10 of the instructions, you will be able to find here which part of the ethnicity and race will fit you best. Next, provide your height and your weight, your eye color and your hair color, your natural hair color. Moving on. Now you're being asked to provide the history of your residence. Provide every location where you have lived in the past 5 years, but that is only if you are applying based on the general provision, the 5-year rule. If you are applying based on marriage to a US citizen, then you only need to provide your address history for the past 3 years. Same applies to VAWA applicants. If you are a spouse of a US citizen who is employed outside the United States, you only need to list the current location. If you're applying based on the military service, you only need to provide the current location. And if you are applying based on honorable military service at any time, then you need to provide the 5 years history. Jane, in our case, is applying based on her marriage to a US citizen, so she only needs to prove her continuous physical presence in the United States for the past 3 years. So first, fill out the current physical address. In care of name means that if you do not live in the place where you would like to receive mail from USCIS and someone else can receive mail on your behalf, then you would write their name here. But if you live and receive mail at the same address, then you can simply keep this blank and start writing your street number. And here you will need to provide your dates of residence where you have lived at this current physical address. Then we will need to fill out the additional address where else you have lived. You do not have to repeat the same address that you listed above, only the addresses that you have not yet mentioned where you have lived before this date. And again, just to repeat, we only provided for the past 3 years because Jane is applying based on her marriage to a US citizen. And one of the reasons why I personally prefer the online application as opposed to the paper form is that the online application will give you a notice if you have any gaps in your history, if you have a lot of addresses to fill in, for example. And on this paper form, you have to make sure that you're doing all the date calculations by hand. Moving on. This next question is asking if your current physical address is the same as the mailing address. If you answer yes, then there's nothing else you need to do. But if you answer no, as you can see, it will then ask you to fill out this question to provide your current mailing address. In our case, our mailing and physical addresses are the same, so we're simply going to leave this blank and move forward to part 5. Here you're being asked about your marital history. Everyone, regardless what citizenship you're applying for, 3-year rule, 5-year rule, or military service, whatever it may be, you must still answer questions 1, 2, and 3. Jane is married, then answer question 2 if your spouse is a member of U.S. Armed Forces, and question 3, how many times you have been married, the number of marriages including the current marriage. If you review the form instructions, they will also tell you to make sure that you are including all marriages, including your current marriage, any marriages before, marriages inside or outside the United States, annulled and civil marriages, religious marriages, even if it wasn't registered with the government, and also if you've been married to the same person more than once, count each marriage separately. Also, if you are applying based on marriage to a U.S. citizen 3-year rule or marriage to a U.S. citizen who is employed outside the United States and you have been married more than once, then you will need to provide all the divorce certificate, annulments, or death certificate showing that your prior marriages were terminated, and you will have to do the same for your U.S. citizen, your current spouse. But if you are applying based on the 5-year rule general provision, or if you are applying based on VAWA, then in that case, you do not have to provide that evidence. Moving on, because Jane is applying based on her marriage to a U.S. citizen, we're going to fill out her spouse's information. So her current spouse, name, date of birth, and date of their marriage. Next, it asks if your current spouse's physical address is the same as your physical address. If you are applying as a spouse of a U.S. citizen, you should be answering yes to this question. And if you answer no, review the form instructions on page 12 because you may not be eligible to apply based on your marriage to a U.S. citizen if you have not been residing together for the past 3 years, because it is one of the requirements on the form instructions. Next, you also must answer when your current spouse became a U.S. citizen. So let's say in our case, by birth in the United States. So if you answered this, you do not have to answer anything else and just go to item 7. But if your current U.S. citizen spouse naturalized at some point in the past, then you would have to answer other and complete 5B, as well as item 6 if your spouse was an immigrant as well. And in question 7, again, you must answer how many times has your spouse been married. And if your spouse has been married more than once, you would need to also provide proof of all their prior marriages. If you are applying based on your marriage to a U.S. citizen, the 3-year rule, then you can skip to the next part. But if you are applying as a spouse of a U.S. citizen who is employed outside the United States, then you would have to provide their employment information here. Again, we do not have to do that because we are not applying based on that. Moving on to part 6, here you will need to provide information on all of your children who are under the age of 18, whether they were born inside or outside the United States, regardless where they live. Any stepchildren as well must be included, any children that are missing, children born out of wedlock. You will need to provide their name, date of birth, where they reside, their relationship to you, and are you providing support for this child? So it doesn't only mean whether or not you claim this child on your tax returns. It means the general support for this child. If you have more questions, you should review the form instructions. But let's say in our case, we have no children, so it is acceptable to write 0. It is also acceptable to leave this blank, and then after you print this application, write none. Moving on, in part 7, you're being asked to provide employment and education history for the past 5 years if you're filing based on general provision, so 5-year rule, or if you are applying based on marriage to a U.S. citizen, for example, then you only need to provide that history for the past 3 years, just like we did with the address history. And also here you will need to provide periods of employment, studies, and unemployment, starting with the most recent. You should not be leaving any gaps here. So once you filled in your employment and school history, move on to the next part. This part again is very important. This one asks about your time outside the United States. So again, if you are applying based on the 5-year general provision rule, then that's the history you have to provide. But if you are applying based on a 3-year rule, then you only need to provide the past 3-year history of your travels. You need to include trips that were longer than 24 hours. You do not have to include any trips that were less than 24 hours because they would not add up to your continuous residence interruption. If you have taken any trips that are longer than 6 months, you should review the form instructions because you may not qualify to naturalize just yet. It's possible that you might have interrupted your continuous residency requirement and then you might have to start over and wait until you have completed continuous residency. And you can review these requirements on page 16 of this form. So we're going to fill in the trips that we have taken, starting with the most recent trip first. And let's say, for example, you have taken a trip that falls in a period before your 5-year permanent residency began. So in our case, Jane became a permanent resident on May 30th, 2021. So when USCIS begins to calculate total time she spent outside the United States over the past 3 years, because we're applying based on a 3-year rule, they will only count 2 days of this trip to Mexico between May 30th and June 1st. And this is because prior to May 30th, Jane was not yet a permanent resident. And the reason I'm explaining this is for your personal calculations, and you have taken a trip that lasted about 6 months and you're afraid that it will interrupt your requirement to be a US citizen, you should really calculate if that 6 months trip actually fell within that 5 year period before you apply for naturalization, or if part of that 6 month period actually fell outside of those 5 years before you became a permanent resident. So that is very important. That will help you calculate this and ultimately determine your eligibility to naturalize. This is another reason why I like the online application better, is because it helps you make these calculations. So anyway, once you finished filling out your trips outside the United States, you may proceed to the next part. So this part is very important, and this has to do with your good moral character, which will ultimately make you eligible or ineligible for naturalization. Answering yes to any of these questions will not automatically make you inadmissible for naturalization, but there is a high chance that it will cause issues for you. So if you have to answer yes to these questions that have to do with moral character, any violations, etc., contact an immigration attorney before you submit this application. So, have you ever claimed to be a US citizen? Have you ever registered to vote in any kind of election? Do you currently owe any federal, state, or local taxes? If you answer yes, you will need to provide proof that you have established a payment plan with the IRS, a printout of which you can obtain directly on the IRS website. Have you ever called yourself a non-resident on taxes since you became a green card holder? Now, question 5A can cause potential issues for people who are coming from communist countries. If you are, for example, from the People's Republic of China, then you would most likely automatically have to answer yes to this question. But again, if that is the case, or if you are unsure how to answer this, then you should contact an attorney. Have you ever advocated or supported any of these things? I will most likely speed through this part, because if you have to answer yes, then you shouldn't be doing this by yourself. Question 8A asks about being part of a military unit and if you served in an army. Say, for example, you lived in a country that required compulsory military preparation service, or like Israel, for example, then you definitely should consult with somebody as to how to answer this question and what evidence to provide in this situation. If you answered this question, military, you may potentially have to answer a question about receiving weapons training, military type training. So keep that in mind. The next questions have to do with your criminal records. And so I also encourage you to review page 20 of the form instructions, which can clarify for you which kinds of offenses and records you need to provide. And USCIS makes it very clear that they do have access to your criminal records, even if they have been expunged. And so you will need to provide this information even if someone, including a judge, an officer, an attorney, told you that these things are no longer on this record, or you don't have to disclose this information. You absolutely have to do that. You're going to provide details of those crimes in the table below, but you will also need to provide evidence, which is what the form instructions are referring to. One of the questions that is very common in this part of the form is being in a traffic incident. So you only need to provide documentation of traffic incidents that involved alcohol or drugs, led to an arrest, or seriously injured another person, a fine or a citation for a traffic violation also is included in this part, and it is better to disclose that information than to omit it, even if you feel like it was insignificant. This also includes political arrests for asylees, for example. It also includes any border patrol arrests by ICE or INS, so you would have to include that here. And again, if you have any additional questions, you should review the form instructions. Moving on, hopefully answered no to all of these. When it comes to misrepresentation, this means if you have ever included information on your prior applications, so this is what it means, benefit in the United States. It's asking about prior visa applications, immigration forms, anything like that that you filled out. Have you ever been placed in removal, rescission, or deportation proceedings? So this can include people who were placed in asylum or claimed political asylum after they were placed in removal or something like that. So you would have to answer yes to this question. And obviously this one as well. This is how you would answer these questions if any of this applies to you. Again, review form instructions. The following questions all have to do with selective service registration. If you were a U.S. citizen or immigrant born a male and you lived in the U.S. anytime between 18 to 26, you were required to register with selective service. So if you received your green card while you were still between the ages of 18 or 25, in your green card approval letter, they will state that you had to register for selective service. Then you would answer yes. Don't answer yes if you were a lawful non-immigrant during this time. So if you were on a student visa or a visitor visa during this time, then you would still answer no to this question because you were not an immigrant. You were not required to register. However, if you were a permanent resident, even if you were undocumented, or if you became an asylee during this time, then you had to register for selective service. And for more information on selective service requirements, you can go to their website. If you were required to register, you would either answer yes, whether or not you registered with selective service, and you would need to provide the date of your registration and your selective service number, which again, you may be able to obtain on their website. And if you didn't register, if you, for example, answered no, then you're going to have to follow the form instructions. But if you registered, you do not need to provide any additional evidence, just the date of registration and your selective service number. Moving on, read any of these questions very carefully and answer yes or no. If you answered no to item 25, move forward to item 30A. Do you hold any hereditary title? If no, skip to the next question. So now here, you're going to have to answer questions that have to do with your allegiance to the United States, which you can also review on page 25 of the form instructions. And most likely, you're going to have to answer yes to most of them. Are you unable to take oath of allegiance because of a disability? Hopefully, you answer no. The final part of this application is asking if you request a fee reduction. This is something that is only eligible to those of you whose income of the entire household is less than or equal to 400% of the poverty guidelines. The naturalization poverty guidelines can be found on the USCIS website. And in that case, you're going to have to provide evidence of your income based on the most recent federal tax returns. The last part of this application is your contact information, certification, and signature. And once you fill this out, you're going to print out this form and sign it here using a black pen. If you used an interpreter for this form, then you will provide their information here. And if somebody else prepared this form for you, then you will also provide their information here. And this is the additional information page. And so finally, Do not complete parts 15 and 16. These parts will be completed at your naturalization interview. If you're unsure where to send this form, you can find the addresses for this form on the USCIS website. So if you go to their website and go to the drop-down menu where to file, if you file your N-400 by mail, you can click this link, direct filing addresses. If you're not a member of the military, you will click the second drop-down menu and find the state where you reside. This will be the address where you send your application. If you would like to know what the fee is for this form, I always encourage you to use the USCIS fee calculator. Find the form here, what kind of applicant you are. So general filing, this is your fee. And there is a $50 discount for those of you who are filing online. If you are applying for a fee reduction right here, this would be your fee. So I hope that you found this video useful. I hope I was able to give you enough detail to feel confident to fill this out on your own. If you have not yet done so, please subscribe to my channel, give this video a thumbs up, and I hope to see you guys in my next videos. Bye!